All right, everybody, welcome back to week 3 of House Church. My name is William Colley. I get to serve here at DC as your executive pastor. I'm joined by your lead pastor, Benjamin Kempfer. How's it going, man?
I'm great, man. I'm great. I'm excited about House Church. We've heard awesome things over the last couple of weeks about people who have we gathered together with different groups of people, just getting to know, have conversations, hear people's story, just, getting to know some folks that you maybe wouldn't always run into on a Sunday, or maybe you'd see them, but you're busy and all that kind of stuff. So it's been cool to hear stories of how people have just really been able to connect and be served through this time.
Yeah, it's exciting. So we're really excited to jump back into content today. So really, this series has been all about equipping our church to better share the gospel.
Yeah.
And we all have somebody that we want to share the gospel with, right?
Yep.
And so maybe just you don't know where to start.
Yeah.
So what is that?
So everybody who knows Jesus, there's a good chance that if you don't, you should. But somebody who doesn't know Jesus, right? There's somebody that you're praying for. It's a parent, it's a kid, it's a friend, it's a coworker, it's an aunt, an uncle, a cousin. Everybody has people in their life that you're like, man, I really want to help this person come to know Jesus.
Yeah.
But you just kind of get to a loss. And so you pray for them, you try to be a nice person, you try to smile a lot, and think, man, maybe one day they're going to come and ask the question. So the hope behind this is that it gives some real practical tools to say, how do we actually then begin to live this out in a way and apply it? So if the first half of the summer with all the full sin stuff this is setting up the principles behind how we share our faith and evangelism. This is the very practical tools to say, this is how you pragmatically do and approach this.
Yeah, that's great. So the first 2 weeks, they've been great. So week 1, we really learned about who is God and learning how to articulate the gospel and put it into our own words. And then last week, really diving into our story and overlaying our story with the gospel and how we can kind of share our testimony, which I think are both critical and very important, but I'm really excited about today as we kind of get into some nuts and bolts of what evangelism looks like.
Yeah, so if the whole summer was kind of setting up for House Church, the first 2 weeks of House Church, we're setting up for the next couple of weeks of House Church.
Just keep climbing the mountain.
Hey,
man.
let's go. The hope is that this today and kind of the rest of the time that we have together in House Church, it's going to be a very, very helpful, highly practical, pragmatic thing that starts to meet the individual.
Great. Well, let's dive into it, man.
Yeah, dude. So today we're going to talk about evangelism styles. Evangelism styles. Let me ask you this. Have you ever heard of evangelism styles?
I'm going to say no. Wow. When I think of styles, I definitely don't think evangelism.
Right. So, which is common, right? There's this quote. So this is actually, a lot of the content for today came from a book that the Bereans, so shout out to the Bereans, they do in Discipleship Level 1. I read this and I was like, man, I feel like I'm reading my bio right now. What's interesting about it is it started to break into different segments how we view evangelism. But it said this quote to kind of lead into the idea, which I thought was so helpful.
Yeah.
It says this. So this is Richard Peace. So the book actually is referencing a guy named Richard Peace who wrote a book called Conversion in the New Testament, where he just kind of did a big survey. How do people biblically in the New Testament come to know Jesus? And this is what he said. How we conceive of conversion determines how we do evangelism. In other words, everyone has a mental picture of what they picture someone coming to know Jesus looks like.
Yeah.
And so how we conceptualize that creates the actions that we take towards it. But here's what I would add to that, and here's what I think is interesting. What we have experienced in our conversion, in us becoming a Christian, is rarely what we expect it to look like for somebody else. In other words, I can experience something, if I look at my journey, my story from last week, and then what I expect it to look like for other people can be something totally different. So my story would have been a story of a sister who loved me, a sister who continued to accept me no matter what I was doing wrong, a sister who continued to invite me and be positive and be all this kind of stuff. And eventually I went and I heard the gospel and I accepted Jesus as Lord and Savior. But I think it's a confrontational conversation in a coffee shop or over lunch, it's like, so that's how I conceptualize it. And again, the problem is that we have different expectations and based on our experience or not based on our experience. And we want to bring those into alignment. And so style, I think, bridges the gap between what our experience has been and our expectations ought to be as we think about how we're going to help someone come to know Jesus.
No, that's good. That's awesome. I think super interesting that we don't think of evangelism as style.
Yeah.
Right? When I think of style, I'm thinking about sports, clothing, music, things like that. But I don't really think how you share your faith is a style.
Yep.
And so,
And yeah, I would say even that within those subcategories, there's styles, right? There's different
Sure.
styles of golf swings. There's different styles of physical football play, of speed, of all that kind of stuff. With the goal is to win the game, right? And so this just kind of takes some slivers of different styles and some compartments.
Yeah. And in some ways, I think will be encouraging for us because maybe we practice a style of evangelism that we actually don't realize is evangelism.
Yep, and that's what makes it difficult.
Yeah.
Is because I conceptualize it being something that seems very difficult to attain. It seems very difficult to actually have it be effective. And so oftentimes I just kind of shrink back and don't do anything with that. So
That's good.
So styles.
Styles. Well, let's dive in, man. We got this handy dandy whiteboard with some arrows. We got north, south, east, west. What are we doing here?
So there's two different couples of styles that I'm
Right.
gonna put in contrast with each other. Okay. So the first two are a process style versus an event style. All right. So I'm gonna write over here process. And I'm gonna write over here an event.
Beautiful handwriting.
I often say I have the penmanship of a remedial third grader. So thanks for participating in class today. So I'll go first to an event. So an event is what we often think of. That's the person who it's a quick, almost under a specific time frame that there's an outpouring of grace, of love, of presentation oftentimes of the gospel where someone almost like a light switch moment comes to know and believe in Jesus, right? And so the idea behind this is that it creates a super dynamic force of the gospel's power. On the other side of that, or let me say this, that's like Paul. Damascus, right? He's walking down, all of a sudden, bright light shines, this voice, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?
Yeah.
He realizes it's Jesus, oh my gosh, all that kind of stuff. So that's like this really big catalytic event. That could be over a coffee shop, that could be over lunch, that could be at a cubicle, that could be at a church service, that could be at a Billy Graham crusade, but it's more event-based, lots of stuff poured out over a quick period of time. So that's the event. Process on the other side of that, which is important, process is more of a gradual, incremental process that people engage in, that they arrive at the identity of Jesus and the implications for discipleship, basically after a lengthy process of discovery. So this is the person who they had some hangups, they had some issues, and it wasn't a instant thing.
Yeah.
But through a gradual and continual set of exposure, whether that's conversation, whether that's seeing somebody, whether that's being invited to stuff, but they're in a process.
Sure.
Just my experience, this isn't 100% of the time.
Yeah.
I'll bring this back over for a second. Events, younger people are oftentimes very influenced by events. This isn't 100% of the time again. Younger is an event, it's a light switch that turns on. Process is oftentimes older folks. There's just more water under the bridge. There's more questions. There's more ideological framework that's been built out and developed and that your life kind of rests on. And so we all are going to naturally engage in either a process or an event. Now, you can do both, but the question here is, what do you naturally trend towards? Do you naturally trend towards more of a process? So the first question is, what is your mental picture of what it is, right? So we have to define what our mental picture is to move from that. The second question is along those lines. It's, are you process or event?
Yeah, that's good. So event being, that could be a huge event, like a Billy Graham type crusade. But it's not just that. It's also, hey, I'm having coffee with somebody. I'm having this very clear share the gospel with somebody. I'm sitting down in the moment. That's probably what we think of.
Yeah.
We think of evangelism, right?
Right.
Where process is more, man, we're just doing life together. It's taking time. We're slowly getting there, but it's a process.
Yeah, exactly right. And so the question is if you were to juxtapose these two together, which we are, which one do you normally fall into? Which one's the easiest for you? So that's number one. The second contrast that we would create is this. It's proclamation versus presence.
Proud of you for that one.
Thanks, buddy. I think that's how you spell it. So, P-R-E.
Hey,
There
you
we
know,
go.
you can't get them all right.
Hyphen.
There you go.
So the difference between these two things is proclamation. Proclamation is basically bringing into words the thing of God.
Okay.
So that sounds kind of general, but the idea behind that is that's sharing your testimony. That could be through question asking, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be initially presenting, but it's taking the things of God, whether it's through conversation or through well-formed rhetoric on stage, whether it's through question asking, whether it's through metaphors and stories and analogies.
Sure.
But it kind of takes and says, hey, let's have a conversation. I'm going to kind of proclaim this. Presence, which is really important, I think much less intuitive. That's the person who likes if you're not a Christian, I want you to hang out with me because I'm hoping that when you spend time with me, you see a part of who Jesus is and you realize the character of God in Jesus through me. And so it's more about being present with that person than it is forcing a conversation with that person. And so we, again, generally trend towards one of these two. Either, we love to have conversations and talk about it and proclaim it or ask questions about it. Or this is kind of the Mother Teresa almost of, man, you like to be present, to be the visible hands and feet of Jesus to this person and have a presence in their life. And over time, they experience Christ through you. Yeah. So the second question then would be, or the next question would be proclamation or presence. Which one do you trend towards? Proclamation, saying it, experiencing it through the kind of the spoken word, or presence, just simply the physical presence of someone in their lives.
Yeah, no, that's great. So what we're going to do right now is we're actually going to take a couple minutes at your house church, or join us online or at your home or whatever. We would love for you to go to downtowncommunitychurch.com. We have a PDF of these questions, of this diagram that kind of hopefully help you out. But we want you to take a couple minutes to kind of write down, answer these three questions. So number one is, what is your mental picture of conversion? Number two, what was your experience and how does it compare to your expectation? What was your experience of your conversion? And number three is, on this diagram, are you process or event? And are you proclamation or presence? So we want you to just take a couple minutes, kind of, pray and kind of work through those things. We'll come back in a couple minutes. All right, everybody, welcome back to House Church. So Ben, I think this is really helpful, but I want to kind of dive in a little bit more about what these mean.
Yeah, so first thing I want to say is to fill in a couple blanks with some of the stuff that we just went through.
Yeah.
The ideas behind these, so proclamation and presence, process and event, especially process and event. Process, if you were to take kind of the biblical precedent for these, right? An
Sure.
event is, again, like Paul, Damascus. Process is more of the walk to Emmaus that the people, the disciples were on. Jesus just died, and they're trying to figure out, man, what happened? He begins with the Old Testament, unpacking it all. Over a period of time, he begins to, kind of show them, I'm actually Jesus, right? But it was kind of an incremental exposure towards it. Proclamation is what you would think of in terms of just like Billy Graham, evangelist. Presence is what you would think of in terms of like Mother Teresa for evangelism. So it kind of helps you to get like a little bit of a framework for how those things look. But I think what's really helpful is what's next is that what these things create for us.
Okay.
So if you think about it, looking at these, so a process person, somebody who's, let's say your answer is process and presence, right? And so you love the process of helping someone come to know Jesus, but you also you're not much of a let me push this type of thing. You're like, I like to be present in people's lives, right?
Yeah.
So what you're actually going to be is what we would call an investor.
Yeah. This is very much me, by the way.
Yes.
Process and presence.
Yes. So this defines you. So I'd say a couple things for you. How I would define an investor is someone who walks with people through the entire process of conversion, from beginning through conversion and beyond. They help to expose people to Jesus through who they are. They demonstrate faithfulness to that person, sacrificial love. So they that's kind of the hallmarks of who this person is.
Yeah.
And so if you are a process person and a presence person, you love to invest in people. You love to invest in relationships. And hopefully by loving, serving, adding value, that person becomes aware of who Jesus is.
Yeah.
The next one, if you are a presence, so you love having presence in people's lives, but you're also kind of an event person, right? You love that thing. You are what we would call a great inviter. So let me tell you what I love about inviters. Well, inviters basically, they compel other people to accompany them into strategic environments, presentations where they're going to hear about the gospel. Oftentimes they'll know the person and they'll kind of triangulate what that person needs in the environment that they invited to. So they know that you're this type of person, so I'm going to invite you to this community group, right?
That's good.
Maybe it's the person who, they've experienced a lot of church hurt and they don't need to go to a big service. They need to go to a community group first. They need a place to belong before they have a place that they believe, right? And some people, they're going to be able to triangulate that and say, man, this person needs to hear a great presentation of the gospel. And so they're great at inviting. I think you do a good job of investing, and I think you also are a really gifted inviter. You invite people over to your house and things like that. So the event isn't always like this church thing, right? It's just a place where that the gospel is going to be present, or the people of God are. And so it might be an invitation to Project Tallahassee or something along those lines, an invitation to serve. So investor and inviter. The next two, if you are a process person, but you also enjoy the proclamation, you are what we call a converser. In other words, you love to have conversations. So this, in my natural state, I'm going to underline it because that's me.
Oh,
Who wouldn't underline their thing, right? Now I feel narcissistic, so I'm going to erase that.
So the preacher likes talking? That's weird.
Weird, dude. So the converser is the person who they expose people gradually to the gospel in a way that allows them to process and internalize and kind of reach their own conclusions. So for me, this is where I love to be, because I love to ask questions. I love to have conversations. I love to find out, man, before I want to present the gospel to you, or even the facets of the gospel to you, I want to know about what's going on in your life, what's happening. So I love the process of getting to know somebody, of finding out what they think, what they believe. Oftentimes, honestly, it's helpful for me to just hear and to learn what people who don't think like me, believe like me, do think and believe. But so that would be a conversion. So it's kind of through conversation over a period of time, a process, they become that. And the other person is the convincer. So if you're a proclamation convincer, yeah, that's how you spell it. Sweet.
Good job.
Thanks, buddy. Spelling is not my strength. But give me some numbers. Anyway, so a convincer is the person that, man, they have confidence that the gospel has the power to change people's lives, right? They're the person who they can look at you, have a conversation. They're very compelling and very convincing about the gospel. They're sensitive to the contingencies of the people's lives. And the thing that I would say is as a caveat, when we think about a convincer, what we often think about is the person who is on the street corner screaming. Right? We think about the person who's just debating, and everybody's like, man, I do not want to be that person. A convincer is more so the person who is, they're helping to understand what are your roadblocks to faith and how can I move those out of the way, right? And so it's less of let me force this, let me force this, let me force this. It's what are the stigmas around Christianity? What's the version of Jesus that you've been handed that creates an aversion to Christianity? And maybe if I can help to clarify what some of those versions and aversions are, I can help to convince you to become. So when we think about this person, we think about the street corner preacher. That is a very, very, very extreme version of that. And so
a subset of this type of person.
Exactly. And by the way, all of these have their strengths and all of these have their weaknesses. The investor, they're great at investing. The problem is they can invest to the point where they fail to present the gospel. The convincer is great at convincing. The problem is they can fail to have empathy with where the person is and what they actually need to hear. The converser can admire the complexity and the intricacy of the individual in the conversation to the point where they never actually present an opportunity to do that. The inviter can, similar to the investor, they can invite people to a place, but never actually have a meaningful conversation themselves. And so everyone has a pro, everything has a weakness. And if you're actually going to take a deep dive into this, what I think is interesting is whatever your diagonal is, oftentimes you can think critically of. So the investor is going to look at the convincer and think this person is arrogant, right? The convincer is going to look at the investor and think this person is a coward. But the important thing is to know each has their strength, each has their weakness. Each one are ones that we can leverage our personality and our God-gifted wiring to do that. And the last thing I'll say is this. Part of this is to know what you are and what I am, so I can know how to leverage that more naturally. This also gives us a good framework to say, with the person I'm ministering to, what would be best for them, right? It's not just like, here's what I do, but you're talking to somebody who is very brash and is very blunt with how they talk and work and do things. They're probably going to be a convincer style, right? So you can kind of modify some of your approach to understand the person that you're talking to and ministering to better.
That's really good. I think a couple things. I think one is because we naturally kind of fall into one of these, it doesn't mean we don't need to work on our gospel presentation, right? Like you said, that we all have a weakness. And so there still is that element of us having to push forward and kind of push that past that awkward stage a little bit. And then the other thing is just, I think about the body of Christ, right? We need all of these people. We need all of these types of people to really form a healthy church body. Yeah.
And so I'll say this, kind of casting some vision for what I hope happens with this. One is you're in a second going to discuss some questions in your groups about kind of where you fall in line, what's the potential downfall, and what's one thing that you can do this week. My hope in this, though, is that it broadens our idea of evangelism. There was a book that was written called Switch, and it's about how to change when change is difficult. And it was a bunch of case studies of a bunch of different things. And one of the things that they studied, or one of the groups that they studied, is hotel maids. And they asked them, do you exercise? And for all the ones that said no, they said, okay, great. For half of them, they put like a little Fitbit type of a thing that measured their activity. For the other half, they didn't. And so for the half that they did, they realized that the people who were cleaning the rooms were working about the equivalent of an hour and a half of cardio every day, right? So doing a ton of cardio. Well, so what they did was they told the group and they said, you guys are actually doing about an hour and a half worth of exercise. So you are exercising. Them understanding that about themselves compared to the control group that knew nothing, lost on average like 7 to 10 pounds in the next month, right? Wow. It's simply by knowing that I am already doing this in a way, and then looking how I can leverage it a little bit more, I think opens up the availability for people to realize. Because I think deep down, people want to be good and helpful. They want to go therefore make disciples of all nations. And I think they're already doing it in some ways. It's just looking at it and saying, man, this is how I already naturally do this. How can I push myself to do this more? How can I round out the other side that's the potential downfall of this? Because I think that everyone can do a great job of it, because everyone, I think, fits somewhere in this category.
Yeah, that's great. So what we want you to do right now is just take a couple minutes, get into groups of 2 or 3, and want you to answer these 3 questions. So number 1, are you naturally an investor, inviter, converser, or convincer? Number 2 is, what do you think is the potential downside of your style? And number 3 is, what's one way you are going to leverage/use your style this week? So you have a little bit of homework, which we're excited about. So why don't you take a couple minutes, get in groups of 2 or 3, and have that discussion right now.